Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, James Whitmore, a millionaire with everything but peace, invites his ex-wife to his wedding, only to discover he has a hidden daughter, Leah. As secrets unfold, he faces the devastating consequences of his past, leading to heartbreak and the realization that some mistakes are irreversible. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. And keep up with our latest stories. James Whitmore, a successful millionaire businessman, had everything he could ever want: a thriving company, luxurious homes in multiple cities, exotic vacations, and the attention of beautiful women at every event he attended. But there was one thing missing from his life piece. His ex-wife Sarah was still a painful reminder of a life that had once been full of passion, love, and unspoken promises. Their marriage had been everything he had wanted in his younger years: intense, full of fireworks, the kind of love that made him feel invincible. They had been the perfect couple in everyone's eyes, the ones who set standards for others to follow. But as the years passed, ambition started to overshadow everything else. James had become more consumed by work, more interested in expanding his empire than in nurturing the relationship with Sarah. Slowly, the distance between them grew, and the spark of their once vibrant love faded. Then, just as James was reaching new heights in his career, Sarah walked away, leaving him devastated and alone in a house that suddenly felt too large, too empty. He never truly understood why she left. Sure, there were arguments, but wasn't that normal? What he didn't realize was that the emotional neglect he had shown her over the years had chipped away at her, leaving her with no choice but to leave. Years had passed since their divorce. James had been married again, this time to someone he truly thought he could build a life with, a woman who seemed to have everything he needed in a partner. Isabel was beautiful, kind-hearted, and supportive in ways that Sarah never had been, or at least that's what James thought. As their wedding day drew nearer, he felt the weight of the past finally lifting. He was ready for this new chapter, ready to move forward. In the midst of all the wedding planning, James made a decision he wasn't entirely sure about. He decided to invite Sarah to his wedding, not because he still loved her, but because he wanted to close that chapter of his life once and for all. He wanted to prove that he had moved on, that he was happy, and that his life was finally in order. Besides, Sarah was a part of his history, a part of who he had become. It felt right to offer her a place at his new beginning. When the invitation was sent, he had no idea what was coming. The day of the wedding arrived, and James was as prepared as he would ever be. The ceremony was set to take place in a grand venue, a castle-like estate perched on a hill overlooking the ocean. His guests arrived, the atmosphere filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Isabel, radiant in her wedding dress, was beaming with happiness. James couldn't help but feel proud of her and the life they had created together. Everything was going according to plan. And then, Sarah walked in. She was dressed in a sleek black dress that highlighted her elegance and maturity. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her makeup was subtle yet refined. She still had that air about her, the one that once captivated him completely. But there was something different this time, something about the way she carried herself, a certain distance in her gaze. But what truly caught James off guard wasn't just Sarah's arrival. It was the woman beside her, a young woman, in her late 20s, with dark hair and striking green eyes, stood quietly next to Sarah. She was beautiful, no doubt, but it was more than that. There was something in the way she held herself, something about the way she looked at James. She was so familiar, so eerily similar to him, from her sharp jawline to the shape of her eyes. It was as though someone had taken a picture of him and turned it into a woman. James felt a chill run down his spine. He stood frozen at the altar as Sarah made her way to her seat, the mysterious woman trailing behind her. His heart raced. Was it possible? Could it be? Before he could form a coherent thought, Isabel's voice broke through the haze. "James, are you okay?" He blinked, taking a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. Yeah, I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. His mind was spinning. He needed to know who that woman was. He needed answers. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and enjoyed the reception, James found himself wandering toward the table where Sarah and the woman were seated. Isabel had disappeared into the crowd, leaving James with a chance to finally address the situation. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but laced with confusion. "Who's that woman you're with?" Sarah looked up from her drink, her eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed him. She knew he was going to ask, and she had been waiting for the right moment to explain. "Her name is Leah," she said softly. "She's my daughter." James froze, his mind racing to process the words. Your daughter? Yes, Sarah replied, her voice steady. She's your daughter, James. My daughter. Our daughter. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. It felt like the world around him tilted. He looked at Leah, really looked at her this time, and the resemblance was undeniable. The same dark eyes, the same sharp features, the same way she carried herself. She looked exactly like him, like a younger version of himself. But how? Why didn't you tell me? James stammered, his voice rising with panic. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and resolve. I didn't tell you because I didn't know how. You were so consumed by your career, James. You were never there when I needed you, when we needed you. I didn't want to complicate things for you, especially after the divorce, but I couldn't hide it. Forever Leah deserves to know who her father is. James stood there, his mind racing, his heart sinking. He had no idea. All this time, he had no idea that he had a daughter out there, someone who shared his blood, his legacy, and his future. He had been so focused on his own success, his own life, that he had missed the most important thing that had happened to him. Leah looked at him, her eyes cold and unreadable. You're not the only one who has regrets, James, she said softly, her voice steady. I've spent my whole life wondering who you were, why you weren't there, why you never even tried to find me. But now, I'm here, and I want you to take responsibility for what you've done. The weight of her words crushed him. He had been living in a bubble, a world where everything was centered around his wealth, his status, and his success. But now, as he stood before Leah, this woman who shared his blood, he realized that everything he had worked for meant nothing if he didn't make things right. James spent the next few days trying to reconcile his emotions. He reached out to Leah, trying to get to know her, to understand who she was. He met with Sarah to talk about what had happened, the life they had shared, and the reasons for her silence. It wasn't easy. There were tears, anger, and frustration. But there was also healing, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they could all move forward together. As the days passed, James found himself drawn to Leah in a way he never expected. He saw pieces of himself in her quick wit, her ambition, her quiet strength. They talked about the years they had missed, the moments they could never get back, but also about the future they could build together. It was a slow process, but it was happening. However, as he worked to repair his relationship with Leah, James couldn't ignore the tension between him and Isabel. She knew something was off. She had seen the way he looked at Leah, the way he tried to build a bond with her. Isabel had always been supportive, but this was different. She felt like an outsider in a world that no longer revolved around her. One night, as they sat in their home, Isabel finally confronted James. You're not the man I married anymore. James, you're not the man I thought you were. I'm sorry, James whispered, his voice filled with regret. I didn't know. I didn't know about Leah. I didn't know what I had been missing. Isabel looked at him, her eyes hard and cold. But now you do, and now you have to figure out where your loyalty lies. James knew, deep down, that Isabel was right. His life had been built on lies, on ignoring the consequences of his actions. But he was determined to change. For Leah, for Sarah, for the family he never knew he had, it was a long and difficult journey. One that tested his integrity and his ability to truly love. But in the end, James knew that the most important thing wasn't the wealth or the success. It was the relationships he had built or broken and the chance to rebuild them. In the end, James realized that infidelity wasn't just about betrayal in marriage. It was about betraying the very people who depended on you, the ones who loved you, and the ones you had neglected for far too long. And while he couldn't undo the past, he could build a future where love, family, and responsibility mattered more than anything else. James spent the next few months in a haze of emotion, trying to balance his new relationship with Leah, his commitment to Isabel, and his lingering sense of guilt over the past. It was harder than he imagined. Every time he looked at Leah, he saw a reflection of his younger self, the man he used to be, the one full of ambition and dreams of greatness. But now, facing the reality of his daughter, he realized just how much he had sacrificed for success, how much he had missed. Leah was the living proof of what could have been, of a life he never got to witness, of moments he had never shared with her. Leah, for her part, was cautious with him. She wasn't angry, but there was a certain reserve in her demeanor. She had always known she had a father out there, but for years, she had convinced herself that she didn't need him. The rejection, or perhaps the absence of him, had made her stronger in some ways. But when he reached out, wanting to build a relationship, it wasn't something she could just accept blindly. He was a stranger no matter how much he looked like her, no matter how much she wanted to believe that he was her father. She had learned long ago not to rely on anyone but herself. At first, their meetings were awkward. James would take her to dinner, asking about her life, about her hopes, about her dreams, and she would answer, but only enough to keep the conversation going, never offering more than she was comfortable sharing. She was afraid of getting hurt, afraid that this was another story of disappointment and abandonment. But James wasn't ready to give up. He had lost so much time with her, and he was determined to make up for it. Slowly, the ice between them began to crack. He learned about her career aspirations, her travels, her passion for art. She was so much like him, ambitious, driven, wanting to make a name for herself in the world. Yet she also had a tenderness in her that he had never expected, a vulnerability that made her even more real to him. The more they talked, the more he wanted to know her, to make up for the years he had missed. Meanwhile, Isabel's patience began to wear thin. She had been a supportive partner, but the tension was palpable. She could sense the distance growing between them. She wasn't blind to the way James looked at Leah, the way he seemed to be captivated by her. Isabel had always known there was something unspoken between James and Sarah, something she couldn't quite understand but had learned to accept. But this was different. This was a child who had been kept from him, a woman who shared his blood, who looked like him, who could change everything. Isabel began to feel like an outsider in her own marriage, unsure of where she stood. One evening, after an especially emotional dinner with Leah, James returned home to find Isabel sitting in the living room, waiting for him. She looked tired, weary from the long days of pretending everything was fine. As he walked through the door, she didn't greet him with a kiss, as she always did. Instead, she just sat there, her eyes searching his face, looking for answers. "We need to talk," Isabel said quietly. James's stomach churned. He had been expecting this conversation. He had known it was coming, but he wasn't ready. He hadn't figured everything out yet, and he certainly wasn't prepared for Isabel's question. "What is it, Isabel?" he asked, his voice heavy. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I see it, James. I see the way you look at her, the way you've been spending more time with Leah. I'm not stupid. You've been pulling away from me, and I don't know where this is going anymore." James opened his mouth to protest, to explain, but he didn't have the words. The truth was, he hadn't known how to explain it himself. He wasn't sure what to say, what was right, what wasn't. He was caught in the middle of something that felt so foreign, so overwhelming, that he didn't know how to move forward without breaking something, maybe everything. "I don't want to lose you, Isabel," he said, his voice strained. "But I can't pretend that this isn't real. I have a daughter. I can't just ignore that. I've spent my life chasing success, building an empire, and I missed it. I missed her, missed everything that came with being a father, and I know I should have been there, but I wasn't. And now I'm trying to make up for it. I don't know how to balance everything. I don't know how to fix it." Isabel's face softened, but there was still a hardness in her eyes, a hurt that James couldn't ignore. "I understand that you want to be there for her, James. I do. But what about us? What about this marriage? What about the life we built together? I don't know where I fit in anymore. I feel like I'm being left behind, like I'm no longer enough for you." James felt the weight of her words hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been so caught up in his newfound role as a father, so consumed by the desire to make things right with Leah, that he hadn't stopped to think about the damage it was causing at home. He had hurt Isabel, the woman who had stood by him, the woman who had been there when he built his empire, when he was at his lowest. He had taken her for granted, and now he was facing the consequences. "I don't want to lose you," he said again, his voice breaking. "I love you, Isabel, but I don't know how to make everything work. I don't know how to be the man I was before, and the man I need to be now." Isabel stood up, her eyes wet with unshed tears. She walked toward him slowly, her movements deliberate. I think you need to figure that out, James, because right now, I'm not sure where we go from here." James reached for her, but she pulled away, shaking her head. "I need space. I need to think. We both do. You have to figure out what you want, because I can't be the one to make this decision for you." That night, James lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He had tried to have it all: love, success, a family, but in the end, he had only ended up with fractured pieces of what he had wanted. He had tried to balance two worlds, and now both of them were on the brink of collapse. Leah was a part of his past, a past he couldn't change, but Isabel was his present, the woman who had supported him through everything. How could he choose between them? The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Isabel took some time away, staying with a friend while James continued his work and spent time with Leah. He wanted to talk to her more, to learn more about her, to make up for all the years they had lost. But at the same time, he knew that if he wasn't careful, he could lose Isabel too. When Isabel returned, they had a long conversation. It wasn't easy, and there were a lot of tears and raw emotions. Isabel made it clear that she couldn't continue living in the shadows of James's past, but she also understood that this was a process. She loved him, but she couldn't be part of a relationship where she didn't feel seen, where she didn't feel like a priority. "I love you, James," Isabel said, "but I need to know that you're not just running away from your past. You need to find a way to make it right. For everyone, Leah, me, yourself." James nodded. He knew what he had to do. He needed to figure out his priorities, not just for himself, but for the people who mattered most in his life. He couldn't undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could make the future worth living for, in the end. James realized that infidelity wasn't just about betrayal in the conventional sense, it was about the ways he had betrayed those who loved him, the ways he had neglected them for his own gain. It wasn't just about the affair or the lies. It was about the love he had ignored, the trust he had broken, and now, it was time to rebuild. James spent the following days in a whirlwind of confusion, wrestling with the complexities of his life. The weight of the decision he had to make, between Isabel and Leah, pressed on him relentlessly. Both women represented different parts of his life, the one he had built with Isabel, the one who had stood by him during his rise to success, and the other, Leah, a reflection of his past, of missed opportunities, and of a life he had never known. Every time he saw Leah, a pang of regret struck him. She was so full of life, so full of potential. He saw parts of himself in her, his ambition, his drive, his sharp instincts. But there was also so much more. She had a resilience he couldn't ignore, an emotional strength that was both a reminder of his failures as a father and a spark of hope for their future. As the days went by, their connection deepened. James found himself in awe of her. He was amazed at how quickly she had adapted to the world without him, how well she had become on her own. She didn't need him, and yet she was willing to give him a chance. But with Isabel, the complexities of their marriage weighed heavily on his heart. She had always been there for him, providing him with unwavering support, even when it was inconvenient. Isabel had built a life with him, a life that included not just shared dreams and ambitions, but shared responsibilities. She had been the one to stay by his side when the world was uncertain. Yet, as he spent more time with Leah, it became evident that there was something missing with Isabel. They were like two strangers bound by a contract, not love. The connection they once shared had weakened over the years, and now, it felt like they were just going through the motions. James knew Isabel would never understand the bond he had. With Leah, there was no way she could grasp the depth of what he was feeling, this mix of guilt, responsibility, and love for a daughter he had never known existed. At the same time, he couldn't forget that Isabel was the woman he had chosen to marry, the woman he had built a life with, and that there were still threads of love between them, though they were tangled and stretched thin. But Leah was an unknown entity, a reflection of what could have been, and he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. Meanwhile, Leah, though initially cautious, had begun to open up. She had shared more about her past, about her childhood with Sarah, the struggles of growing up without a father. James felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and shame wash over him as she spoke. He realized how many years he had missed out on her life, years he couldn't get back. But he also realized how strong Leah was. She had turned out to be an incredibly well-adjusted, successful woman, despite the emotional void left by his absence. He admired her strength, but he also regretted that he hadn't been there to see it, to support her, to guide her. One evening, James decided to invite Leah over for dinner. He thought it would be a good way to talk, to truly bond and understand her more. As they sat at his dining table, the conversation turned to deeper, more personal matters. He asked her how she felt about the possibility of forming a relationship with him, of them starting over as father and daughter. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel," Leah admitted, stirring her wineglass slowly. "I mean, part of me is relieved. I've spent so many years feeling like something was missing, and now I know why. But the other part of me," she trailed off, looking at her glass as though the answer was hidden there. "The other part of me wonders what kind of relationship we could possibly have after all this time." James leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his eyes fixed on her. "We take it one step at a time," he said softly. "I can't change the past, Leah, but I want to be here now. For you, I want to make up for the years I missed." Leah looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "I don't know if we can ever make up for that time," she said, her voice a mix of hope and skepticism. But we can try. I don't expect miracles, James. I just need to know you're willing to be present. I am, James responded, a firm conviction in his voice. I'm here, Leah. I'm not going anywhere. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust. But as much as they were connecting, a nagging feeling in the back of James's mind wouldn't go away. He kept thinking about Isabel, about the life they had, about the commitment they had made. Despite the cracks in their relationship, there was still so much history there. Isabel had stood by him through thick and thin. She had given him everything, and yet, the distance between them had become so wide that it felt like they were living in two different worlds. Could he really give up on the life they had built, on the love they had once shared, just because of the sudden appearance of Leah? The days passed in a blur, and the tension between James, Isabel, and Leah began to grow. Isabel felt James slipping away, both physically and emotionally. They would talk about their future, but it felt more like a negotiation than a conversation about love. James had tried to make it work, but the truth was that Isabel was tired of trying to compete with a daughter who had been kept from him for years, tired of living in a marriage where she felt like the second choice. And then, one night, Isabel finally confronted him. James, you need to make a choice, she said, her voice shaking. I've given you everything, but I can't live in this uncertainty anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. You need to decide who you want to be with, because I can't keep waiting. James looked at her, his heart heavy with guilt and confusion. He loved Isabel, but Leah was a part of him he couldn't ignore. The bond they were starting to form was something raw and real, something he had always wanted but never thought he deserved. The next morning, Isabel packed her bags and left. There were no dramatic confrontations, no harsh words, just a quiet, painful departure. James watched her walk out of the door, and it hit him with the force of a wrecking ball. She was gone. There was no going back now. For a few days, James was left to process everything. He spent time with Leah, trying to understand the depth of the bond he was forming with her. But the reality of Isabel's departure was always there, hanging in the air, reminding him of the life he had lost. And then, just as he was beginning to think he could move on with Leah, the truth came out. Isabel had filed for divorce, but it wasn't just that. She had also been seeing someone else. Someone she had met while James was caught up in his whirlwind of reconnecting with Leah. The news hit him like a sucker punch. Isabel had moved on, but in the worst way possible. She had started a new chapter, one that was now without him. Leah, seeing the devastation in his eyes, put a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to go through this alone, James, she said quietly. I'm here, and I want to be part of your life. But, even as Leah spoke, James couldn't help but feel the weight of the years he had wasted, years that could have been spent with Isabel, with Leah, and with the family he had never known he wanted. Now everything was in shambles. His marriage, his dreams, everything he had worked for was gone. All he had left was the promise of a new beginning with Leah, but even that felt uncertain. The emotional fallout of his choices was far from over. James would have to come to terms with the fact that the life he had built was no longer the one he could return to. He would have to rebuild not just with Leah, but with himself. And as he looked at the empty space where Isabel had once stood, he realized that love, once broken, could be difficult to repair but not impossible. It would take time, effort, and understanding. It would take more than just wanting something. It would take action, and the first step was learning to forgive himself. But the road ahead was still unclear. The past was always a shadow, lurking just behind him. Would he ever be able to fully move forward, or would he always be haunted by the choices he had made? Only time would tell. James had never fully understood the weight of his decisions until now. As he stood in the aftermath of everything that had fallen apart, he had always been someone who believed in fixing things, in taking control and making everything work. But now, as he looked around his empty house, he realized that some things weren't so easy to fix. Leah had been his lifeline in a way, but she wasn't the answer to everything. The realization stung him. She had come into his life like a breath of fresh air, offering him a chance to right the wrongs of the past, but even she couldn't replace the years lost, the relationships shattered, and the trust that had been broken. As the days passed, James sank into a quiet depression. He continued to meet Leah, but it wasn't the same. Their conversations had grown more strained, as if the weight of everything that had happened was slowly pushing them apart. Leah tried to understand, but she wasn't blind to the changes. In him, she could see the pain, the regret, and the way his mind seemed to wander back to Isabel. She knew he was grieving not just the loss of his marriage, but the loss of the idealized version of the life he had once imagined. He was trapped in a constant state of reflection, unable to move forward with the same ease that he had approached every other aspect of his life. Then, one evening, after weeks of distance between them, Leah came to him with a decision. "James," she said, her voice steady but laced with sadness, "I can't do this anymore." He looked at her, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" Leah sat down across from him, her gaze unwavering. "I understand what you're going through. I do, but I can't be the distraction. I can't be the person you turn to when you need comfort. You're not ready for this, James. You're not ready to be here for me. I'm not just a part of your past. I need you to be present, and right now, you're still stuck." James felt the sting of her words like a slap to the face. It wasn't just that he felt like he had failed her, it was that he realized, deep down, that she was right. He had been so focused on fixing everything that he hadn't allowed himself to heal, and in trying to fix things with her he had been avoiding the very issue that had caused the rift in his life, his inability to face his own failures. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I thought that if I could fix things with you, everything else would fall into place." Leah shook her head. "You can't fix anything until you fix yourself. You can't fix your relationship with me, with Isabel, or with anyone else until you learn to be honest with yourself. You need to heal first, James, and I'm not going to be the one to hold you back from that." James felt his chest tighten. The weight of what she was saying hit him hard. For the first time in a long time, he saw the truth of her words. He couldn't move forward with Leah or with anyone until he had figured out how to heal from the damage he had caused. He couldn't be the man he needed to be for her, for Isabel, or for himself, until he had come to terms with the wreckage of his past. "I can't keep doing this to you, Leah," he whispered. "I need to face my mistakes. I need to figure out what I want. And that starts with figuring out who I am without all of this, without the money, without the success, without the distractions." Leah smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I hope you find yourself, James, I really do, but you need to do this on your own. You need to be strong enough to walk away from all the things that have defined you and rediscover who you really are." It wasn't an easy decision for either of them, but they both knew it was necessary. Leah left quietly, leaving James alone in the house that now felt emptier than ever. The silence was deafening, but it was exactly what he needed. It forced him to confront everything he had been avoiding. Over the next few weeks, James immersed himself in self-reflection. He reached out to a therapist, someone who could help him navigate the emotional wreckage he had created. He was surprised by how much weight lifted off his shoulders the moment he took that first step toward healing. For the first time in years, he wasn't focused on managing the chaos or on keeping up appearances. He was focused on understanding himself and on working through the layers of guilt, regret, and confusion that had been building up for so long. He met with Isabel one last time, in the hope of closure, but it wasn't easy. The anger was still there just beneath the surface. She had been hurt, betrayed, and though she had tried to forgive him, the wounds were too deep. They spoke about the future, about the past, but they didn't find any easy answers. Isabel had moved on, and so had he, in a way. Their meeting ended without any grand gestures, no promises, just a shared understanding that their paths had diverged irreparably. Months passed, and James slowly started to rebuild his life, this time focusing on himself first. He wasn't perfect, and he knew there would always be scars. But as time went on, he began to find a sense of peace. He couldn't change the past, but he could learn from it. He could build a life where success wasn't defined by wealth or power, but by emotional growth, by connections, and by healing the relationships he had broken. One day, as he walked through the park near his apartment, he saw Leah sitting on a bench. She looked up, her face softening when she saw him. He approached her slowly, unsure of what to say, but when she smiled at him, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey," she replied, patting the seat next to her. "How have you been?" "Better," he admitted, sitting beside her. "I've been working on myself. I think I'm finally understanding what I need to do to move forward." Leah nodded. "I'm glad to hear that, James. You deserve to find peace. I hope you're getting there." "I am," he said, looking at her, "and I've realized something important. You are never just a distraction. You're a part of me, and I want to find a way to have you in my life, in a healthy way. But I need to earn that." Leah smiled, and for the first time James saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I think we can start from there. No rush, no expectations, just a step forward." They both stood up, the weight of the past lifting, in small increments, as they walked side by side, not knowing exactly where the future would lead. but understanding that they would move forward together. There were still many questions to answer, many struggles to face, but for the first time in a long time, James felt like he had the strength to face them. As James walked alongside Leah, he felt something stirring inside him, something that had been dormant for far too long. He could sense the change in their dynamic. It was no longer about the confusion or the guilt that had clouded their relationship in the past. It wasn't about fixing things for the sake of appearances or avoiding the consequences of his choices. It was about healing and creating something new. Leah, too, was different now. There was a calmness about her that James hadn't noticed before. She was still the same fiery, independent woman he had first been drawn to, but now she seemed grounded, confident in who she was. She had given him the space to find himself, and now she was patiently waiting for him to meet her halfway. As they continued to walk through the park, the tension that had once existed between them began to dissolve. They weren't speaking much, but their silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, with the unspoken acknowledgement that their journey was only just beginning. They reached a secluded bench by a small pond, and Leah sat down first, glancing up at James with a smile that made his heart race. For a moment, neither of them said a word. James looked at her, taking in the way the soft sunlight reflected in her hair, the way her lips curled into a small, knowing smile. He had never seen her more beautiful, not just in her appearance, but in the way she carried herself, in the way she exuded a quiet strength that made him feel both awed and humbled. Slowly, James sat down beside her, the warmth of her presence enveloping him. His breath caught in his throat as he turned to face her, their eyes locking with an intensity that neither of them could deny. They both knew that they were on the edge of something new and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Without thinking, James reached for her hand, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. The contact sent a surge of heat through his body, a reminder of how much he had missed physical connection, missed the feeling of being with someone who understood him on a deeper level. He could feel the pulse of her heartbeat under his touch, and it steadied his own. Leah turned toward him, her eyes soft yet filled with a mix of vulnerability and desire. She took a slow breath, as if preparing herself for what she knew was coming. "James," she whispered, her voice low and trembling, "I don't want us to just pick up where we left off. I want something more, something real." He felt his chest tighten at her words, his heart racing even faster. "I want that too, Leah, more than you know." And then, without hesitation, he pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was as much an awakening as it was a culmination of everything they had shared. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if both of them were testing the waters after everything that had happened. But as their lips met again, more urgently this time, the world around them seemed to fade away. All the confusion, the guilt, the emotional weight that had been bearing down on him for so long, it all disappeared in that one moment. Leah's fingers threaded through his hair as she deepened the kiss, her body pressing closer to his, the heat between them igniting something. Deep inside, James felt the passion that had been building between them, something raw, something desperate surging to the surface. He kissed her with a hunger he hadn't felt in years, a hunger not just for her body, but for the connection they were creating, the promise of what could be. The kiss turned into a dance of desire. James's hands moved to her back, pulling her against him, as if trying to meld their bodies together, as if trying to make up for all the years they had lost. Leah responded with equal fervor, her hands sliding to his chest, her touch sending shivers down his spine. He could feel her heart pounding, the same rhythm as his own. For the first time he truly felt like he was with someone who understood him, who saw him for who he really was, flaws and all. As the kiss broke, they both gasped for air, their faces inches apart, their breath heavy. Leah's eyes met his, her pupils dilated, her lips swollen from the intensity of their kiss. "James," she breathed, her voice a mixture of desire and need. "I want this. I want you." The words sent a shock of electricity through him. He could no longer deny what he felt. He had been holding himself back, trying to protect both Leah and himself from the raw emotion that had been building between them. But now, in this moment, it felt impossible to resist. "I want you to," he whispered, his voice thick with desire. "I need you." Without another word, he kissed her again, this time with more urgency, more passion, as if they were both trying to catch up on all the time they had lost. His hands roamed over her body, feeling the warmth of her skin through the fabric of her clothes. He wanted to memorize the way she felt in his arms, the way her body responded to his touch. Leah's hands moved to the hem of his shirt, pulling it over his head, her fingers grazing the hard lines of his chest. James groaned at the feeling of her hands on his skin. It had been so long since he had felt anything this intense, this real. He wanted to give himself to her, completely, to let go of everything that had been holding him back. As they lay back on the grass, their bodies tangled together, James felt a sense of liberation he had never experienced before. This wasn't just about passion, it was about reclaiming something that had been lost. It was about vulnerability, trust, and the understanding that they could move forward together. No matter how messy the past had been, Leah's lips found his neck, her breath hot against his skin as she kissed him with fervor. "Make love to me, James," she whispered, her voice husky with need. "Show me that we can have something real." And in that moment, James knew that this was the beginning of something he hadn't expected, something beautiful and unpredictable. He kissed her once more, his body responding to hers, as they moved together in a rhythm that was both familiar and new. The passion they shared that night was unlike anything James had ever known. It was raw, it was deep, and it was filled with the promise of a love that had been waiting for years to ignite. As dawn broke, they lay together in the soft morning light, their bodies entwined, their hearts beating in sync. The world had shifted beneath them, and for the first time in a long time, James felt truly at peace. He had no idea what the future held, but in Leah's arms, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. And for the first time, he realized that passion wasn't just about desire. It was about letting go of the past, of embracing the present, and of building something new, something that could withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. As James lay there with Leah, the soft morning light casting gentle shadows over their bodies, he felt a sense of calm he had not experienced in years. The storm inside him, the one that had torn through his marriage, his failures, and his guilt, had finally quieted. The past wasn't gone, but it no longer felt like it was drowning him. Leah had shown him what it meant to be truly present, to step outside of the mistakes and the pain, and to simply be with someone in the moment. Her fingers lightly traced patterns on his chest, sending sparks of warmth through his skin. His heart had finally slowed to a steady rhythm. And for the first time in a long time, James allowed himself to relax, to enjoy the peace that Leah had brought into his life. He turned his head to look at her, marveling at how much she had changed. Him without ever even trying. Leah caught his gaze, her lips curving into a soft smile. There was no pretense in the way she looked at him, no judgment, no hesitation, just warmth, just understanding. She had seen the depths of his struggles, and yet she was still here, still willing to give him a chance. That was a gift he wasn't sure he deserved, but now that he had it, he would never take it for granted. "James," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "we've come so far, but I need to know, where do we go from here?" The question hung in the air, as though the weight of it might break the fragile calm they had found. James hesitated, unsure how to answer. His feelings for Leah were undeniable, but he knew there was still so much they needed to work through. It wasn't just about their physical connection, it was about their emotional bond, their willingness to face their pasts together. "Have all the answers," he said finally, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But I know one thing, I want to find out what we can build together. I know it won't be easy. I know that we both have a lot of healing left to do, but I'm willing to try, Leah, with you, if you'll let me." Leah looked at him, her eyes searching his, as if weighing his words. The silence between them was thick, but it was a comfortable silence, one that allowed space for honesty and vulnerability. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "I want that too, James. I want us to try. But we have to be real with each other. We can't keep hiding from the past. We have to face it together." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything they had been through. James knew that she was right. They couldn't just sweep their issues under the rug. But in that moment, he also knew that they didn't have to do it alone. They had each other now, and that was the first step toward healing. "Agreed," James said, his voice full of determination. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this work. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future, and I want to shape it with you, Leah." They kissed again, slowly, tenderly, as if sealing a promise that neither of them would break. Their connection, so strong and raw the night before, was now tempered by a quiet understanding. They didn't need to rush into anything. They could take their time, building their relationship on trust, patience, and mutual respect. As the weeks passed, James and Leah began to rebuild their bond. They spent more time together, going on long walks, having deep conversations, and learning about each other in ways they hadn't before. The passion between them was still there, a constant undercurrent, but it was tempered by something deeper now, something more enduring. It wasn't just about the physical desire. It was about the emotional connection they were fostering, The shared moments that reminded them both of why they had fallen in love in the first place. But the road ahead wasn't without its challenges. James still carried the weight of his past, his mistakes, his infidelity, and the damage it had done not just to his marriage with Isabel, but to his own sense of self. And Leah had her own wounds to heal, ones that had nothing to do with him, but everything to do with the way she had been forced to guard her heart for so long. They both had walls, some higher than others, but they were willing to tear them down piece by piece. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Leah turned to James with a serious expression on her face. "James," she said, her voice filled with both tenderness and concern, "I need to ask you something." He looked at her, a knot of anticipation forming in his stomach. "What is it? Are you truly ready for this? For us? For what it means to move forward, not just with me, but with yourself? Because I need to know that you're doing this because you want it, not because you feel like you owe it to me or anyone else." James took a deep breath, the weight of her question sinking in. It wasn't just about her, it was about him too. About the choices he had made and the person he had become. "I'm ready, Leah," he said quietly, his voice full of conviction. "I want this more than anything. But I know I need to be honest with you. I'm still working through my own demons. I'm still figuring out who I am, who I want to be. But I know I want to be with you. I want us to make this work." Leah smiled softly, her eyes glistening with understanding. "I'm not asking for perfection, James. I just need you to be real with me. And I need you to give yourself the space to heal. We can't do this if you're still holding on to guilt or regret." James nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He hadn't realized how much he had been carrying until now. The guilt, the regret, the endless second-guessing, it had all been weighing him down, preventing him from fully moving forward. But Leah was right. He couldn't truly embrace the future unless he let go of the past. "I'll work on it," he promised, his voice filled with determination. "For me, for us." The next few months were a journey of self-discovery for James. He took time to reflect on the man he had become and the man he wanted to be. He started therapy, confronting the deep-seated issues that had shaped his decisions and his actions. And as he did, he felt the weight of his past slowly lift, replaced by a newfound sense of clarity and strength. Leah stood by him through it all, her support unwavering. She wasn't looking for a perfect man. She was looking for someone who was willing to grow, to learn, and to embrace love in all its complexities. And as the days passed, their bond grew even stronger, not just because of the passion they shared, but because they were building something real, something grounded in trust, honesty, and mutual respect. One evening, as they stood together on a cliff overlooking the ocean, James took Leah's hand in his, the cool breeze tousling their hair. "I think we've made it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. Leah looked up at him, her smile radiant. "We're not there yet, James, but we're on the right path, and that's enough for me." As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, they kissed again, not with urgency, but with the quiet promise of everything they had built together. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, James was at peace. He had found a love that was both passionate and healing, a love that had the strength to overcome their past, and the potential to create a future they could face together. That as James and Leah continued to build their life together, something unexpected began to stir beneath the surface. For the first time in months, James was beginning to feel like he was truly moving forward, shedding the remnants of his past. Leah was his anchor, her patience and understanding giving him the freedom to heal. But life, as it often does, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One rainy evening, as they were preparing dinner together in the kitchen, the phone rang. James glanced at the caller ID and felt a knot twist in his stomach. It was Isabel, the woman who had once been his wife, the one he had betrayed. Leah noticed his change in demeanor as soon as he picked up the phone. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. James hesitated for a moment, his eyes meeting hers. He should have told her sooner, should have been more open, but the weight of his past and the lingering guilt still clung to him. "Yeah, it's Isabel," he said, his voice unsteady. "She wants to talk." Leah's heart sank, but she kept her composure. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked, her tone calm but with a hint of sadness. James shook his head. "No, stay. We're in this together." He answered the phone, his hand shaking slightly. "Isabel," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "James." Isabel's voice came through the line, distant and cold, yet laced with something he couldn't quite place. "I need you to come to the office. It's urgent." His stomach churned. There was an unsettling quality in her voice, something that made him uneasy, like she was hiding something. "What's going on?" he asked, the concern creeping into his tone. "I can't explain over the phone," Isabel replied, her voice faltering. "Just come, please." James looked over at Leah, who was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, a quiet storm of emotions brewing beneath her calm exterior. She nodded, as if silently giving him permission to go. "I'll be there," he said before hanging up the phone. Leah didn't say anything as he grabbed his jacket and slipped out the door. She didn't have to. She knew the tension in the air wasn't just because of Isabel, it was because of the past they had both worked so hard to bury, and now it was resurfacing in a way neither of them could have predicted. When James arrived at Isabel's office, he found her pacing nervously behind her desk. Her usual composed demeanor was gone, replaced by something raw, something desperate. She didn't even acknowledge his arrival until he spoke. "What's going on, Isabel?" he asked, his voice now filled with a mix of concern and suspicion. Isabel turned to face him, her eyes wide, filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "I know you've been moving on, James," she said, her voice trembling, "but there's something. You don't know something I never told you." James felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" Isabel took a deep breath and steadied herself before saying, "I'm pregnant, James, and I'm sure it's yours." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind went blank as he tried to process what she had just said. He had assumed his past with Isabel was behind him, that his mistakes had been just that, mistakes, but now the truth was staring him in the face, and it was worse than anything he could have imagined. You're what?" James stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to ruin your life," Isabel continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "I thought I could do this on my own, but now I don't know what to do. I'm scared." James stood frozen, his mind racing as the implications of her words sank in. The child Isabel was carrying could very well be his, a product of the affair he had once allowed to tear his marriage apart. How had he not seen this coming? He felt his pulse quicken, panic rising in his chest. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why now?" Isabel lowered her gaze, guilt written all over her face. "I didn't want you to feel obligated. I know you've moved on with Leah, and I didn't want to interfere, but I can't keep this from you anymore." James's stomach churned. He had been so focused on rebuilding his life with Leah, so sure that he was leaving his past behind. But now, everything felt like it was unraveling. He had never expected this. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. Isabel stepped closer, her eyes pleading with him. "I just need to know you'll be there for me. For the baby. I can't do this alone." James felt his heart break. He had spent so long trying to right his wrongs, trying to be a better man for Leah, and now he was faced with the reality that his past was not as far behind him as he had hoped. The one thing he had feared most, the consequences of his past mistakes, was staring him in the face when he returned to Leah. He found her sitting on the couch, waiting for him, her eyes full of questions. "James, what happened?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with uncertainty. He sat down beside her, running a hand through his hair, trying to collect his thoughts. He could feel the tension in the air, the knowledge that everything between them was about to change. "Leah," he began, his voice trembling with emotion, "there's something I have to tell you. Isabel, she's pregnant, and the baby might be mine." Leah's face paled as the words hit her like a wave crashing against rocks. Her eyes filled with a mixture of shock, hurt, and disbelief. She stood up, backing away from him, as though she needed space to process the bombshell James had just dropped. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice quiet but full of anguish. "I just found out," James said, his voice raw with regret. "I swear, I didn't know before. I never meant for this to happen." Leah shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I thought we were building something real. James, I thought you were ready to leave all of this behind. I don't know if I can handle this." James stood up, reaching for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "I need to think," she said, softly, her voice breaking. "I need to figure out if I can even trust you anymore." Leah's words hit him like a physical blow. He had never imagined that the consequences of his past would destroy what he had fought so hard to build. But now, with the reality of Isabel's pregnancy hanging between them, James had no idea how to move forward. As Leah left the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence, James realized just how fragile everything he had worked for truly was. His past mistakes had come back to haunt him, and now he had to face the ultimate test. Would Leah be able to forgive him? Would they be able to rebuild again? Or had everything he had hoped for already crumbled beyond repair? The future, once filled with hope and promise, now seemed uncertain, shrouded in a cloud of doubt. But as James sat there alone in the dim light, he knew one thing for sure: his journey to redemption had only just begun, and the road ahead would be longer and more difficult than he ever could have imagined. As the days passed, the weight of the situation pressed harder on James. He tried to reach out to Leah, to apologize, to explain himself, but each time he did, her responses grew colder, more distant. The space between them widened, as though an invisible wall had gone up, one that James couldn't tear down, no matter how hard he tried. Isabel's pregnancy loomed over him, a constant reminder of the mistake he had made, and the child he might never be able to fully embrace. But it wasn't just Isabel's presence that haunted him, it was the devastation in Leah's eyes, the pain he saw every time they spoke. One evening he found himself standing outside their apartment, feeling the cold bite of the air as he stared at the door, willing her to open it. He had planned to come here, to talk, to fix things. But when the door finally opened, it wasn't the reunion he had hoped for. Leah stood there, her eyes swollen from crying, her expression empty. She wasn't angry, she wasn't yelling, she was just broken. "I can't do this anymore, James," she said softly, her voice so fragile that it nearly shattered him. I've tried to understand, to forgive, but I can't. I can't share you with the past. I can't keep waiting for you to choose me fully, without hesitation." Her words felt like a knife to the heart, slicing through every shred of hope he had left. He stepped forward, desperate to hold her, to beg her to stay, but she shook her head, stepping back. "I love you, James," she whispered, her voice trembling, "but I don't think I can love you the way you need me to anymore. You've already given so much of yourself to someone else, someone who isn't me, and I don't know how to come back from that. You broke something in me, something I can't fix." His chest tightened as he tried to find the right words, tried to stop her from walking away, but nothing came. All he could do was stand there, the weight of his own failures suffocating him, the truth crashing down with a force that left him breathless. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I never meant for this to happen. Please, I need you, Leah." But Leah didn't move. Her eyes were clouded with unshed tears, but they were no longer tears of love or hope. They were tears of finality. "I know you do," she said quietly, wiping her eyes, "but love isn't enough. And I think it's time for both of us to let go." The silence between them stretched, unbearable, as her words hung in the air. Leah turned away, her back to him, as she closed the door with a soft click, and James was left standing there, the world crashing down around him. The next few weeks were a blur. James tried to fill the emptiness with work, with distractions, but nothing could dull the pain. The memory of Leah's face, her voice, her quiet resolve, stayed with him. Every moment without her felt like a wound reopening, the ache too deep. To ignore, he tried calling her, sending messages, but she never replied. She had made her decision, and it was clear to both of them that it was the right one, even if it tore him apart. James knew he had lost her for good. The weight of his past mistakes, the betrayal, the lies, everything he had done had led him to this moment. One evening, he stood in their old favorite spot by the lake, the place where they had spent countless hours talking about their dreams, their future. Now it felt like a cruel reminder of what he had thrown away. He closed his eyes, remembering the way she had looked at him, the way her laughter had filled the spaces between them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring he had bought for her, the one he had planned to give her after he had sorted everything out. His heart ached as he stared at the diamond, the symbol of a future that would never come to be. Slowly he threw it into the water, watching as it sank to the bottom, disappearing into the darkness below. The world felt empty, as if all the colors had faded from his life. Leah had been the light he had never truly appreciated until it was too late. Now, that light was gone, and all that was left was the cold, dark void he had created. And so, James stood there, alone in the stillness of the night, the heartbreak of losing Leah settling in deep. He would never be the man she needed him to be. He would never be the man he had hoped to become. The path he had taken had led him here, and the consequences of his choices were now irrevocable. The pain of losing her was unbearable, but James knew that he had to face it. He had built his own destruction, and now all he could do was live with the consequences. There would be no second chance, no redemption. Leah was gone, and she was never coming back. The story ended with silence of a broken heart, of love lost and dreams shattered. And in that silence, James finally understood the price of infidelity.